Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. The saga continues. Before Max confirmed he was staying with Red Bull for the 2026 season, there were big rumours that he was sharing time with Toto Wolff on his yacht in Sardinia, discussing a potential deal with Mercedes. That's not going to happen, certainly not yet. Russell will stay with Mercedes next year, but what about in the longer term? Because as of the last 24 hours, we are now getting pictures of Max and Toto shirtless on his yacht. Does that mean anything for George Russell? Should he be worried, especially about 2027 and beyond? Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Driver market stuff is everywhere today. This is the current state of play in the driver market. The Cadillac seats have been especially interesting over the last few days. Rumours that they will look to get one experienced driver and one less experienced driver. The experienced driver we think is going to be Perez. There was actually a quick update on this from what we talked about yesterday. Thomas Maher says that as far as he's aware, the announcement of this is expected after the summer break. So around about the Dutch Grand Prix, shortly afterwards, we are apparently expecting Cadillac to confirm Sergio Perez as one of their two drivers. Supposedly the driver leading up the charge in the other seat is Felipe Drugovich. There were a couple of hints towards this recently, and I will say Drugovich in the time that he did in the Aston Martin instead of Alonso in FP1 back in Hungary, in the comments that he made to the media, seems pretty optimistic about his future with Formula 1. And I don't think Drugo is expecting to get the Aston Martin seat anytime soon because Alonso's not going anywhere yet, Stroll's not going anywhere yet, and if one of them does go, they'll try and get Max before they get Drugovich, as we imagine we'll know. So it's interesting. Jack Crawford's another option. Alex Dunn's an option. We've talked about the likes of Yuki, maybe, whether that could be a consideration. Mick Schumacher, among others. But it looks like a Perez-Drugovich combination is, the most likely combination that we currently have of drivers at Cadillac next season. Colapinto set to stay at Alpine. That's the big rumour of the day as well, even though he's had a difficult time and maybe that will not change. It does appear he will keep his seat at least through the end of the season. Next year, though, of course, is the big question, because if Bottas doesn't get the seat at Cadillac, he will probably look to get the seat at Alpine, and I don't imagine that Gasly's going anywhere anytime soon. One to keep an eye on there. Liam Lawson, by the way, I don't know if this is because Christian Horner's now been sacked, but Lawson has been making some pretty heavy remarks to the media with regard to his circumstances at Red Bull. Of course, he outperformed, technically, Max Verstappen in Hungary. He finished ahead of him, as we know, on the road in a Racing Bull. But Lawson had the following things to say on his demotion from Red Bull. So he mentions how in China, after a difficult time in Australia, they tried a setup on the car. We took a shot in the dark with the setup to try to learn something. This also might be what Gasly is talking about with regards to Yuki. We know that he made those comments a couple of days ago to the media and said, there are things that I can't talk about, but effectively there are reasons why Yuki isn't at the level that he maybe should be at, or you might expect him to be at, compared to Max. And maybe part of that is that with the driver that isn't Max, with the intention to get Max to get the best out of his car, they will give their second driver all sorts of experimental setups and just stuff to mess around with so they can learn what works, what doesn't work, so then they can decide what to put on Max's car instead. This, of course, is done, but when Max is your chief driver, when it's very clear that Red Bull this season are only fighting for the Drivers' Championship, then it's understandable maybe that the team would do this. And we know how Horner operated that Red Bull team, where it's very cutthroat. If there's no shot of winning the constructors, then the way that Red Bull will operate is, they don't mind sacrificing their second driver to try and learn something that could help Max. And it's sensible to do it, right? On some level, it's sensible to give as much information you can to your lead man. But the flip side of that is that it can destroy your second driver. So you've got to get a new one every year. And Lawson kind of implies a similar thing. They tried an experimental setup to understand the car. For me, I was under the understanding that it was to help me develop for the future, to have an understanding of the car. So I was happy to drive with this setup. Now, maybe in hindsight, Lawson should have said, not like he would have had much choice, but he should have said, okay, I'm not using your experimental setup. I want to drive with the setup that Max has got on his car, so at least I can look respectable. But then Lawson struggled with it and says that performance was then used to demote me from the team, basically. So it's pretty scathing, really, from Lawson to say that they gave me an experimental setup that was not very good. to not necessarily help me, but to maybe gain more understanding to help Max. And then when the setup didn't work for me and the setup just wasn't very good, then they used that performance to demote me. Now, of course, that's his perspective. The perspective of the team, I'm sure, would be rather different. There were rumours that Lawson was just mentally struggling with the situation. The engineers and the mechanics felt like he was cooked mentally, and therefore it was only going to be a downhill spiral, so they dropped him for Yuki, and of course Honda were pushing hard for that as well going into the Japanese Grand Prix. But I don't know if he feels now, Lawson, more confident in saying this, that Christian Horner's been sacked, but it's pretty interesting. There were a few things over time that made it not smooth. It wasn't a clean couple of weekends, admitting that his own level wasn't good enough, but, you know, still demoting him after 2 races. If I knew I was going to get only 2 races, I would have done things differently, but I didn't at the time. Maybe I was a bit naive, but I thought I was going to get longer and have time to learn, he says. And to be fair, since Austria, Lawson's performances in the Racing Bulls have really picked up, and he's been pretty competitive recently with Hadjar. He's only a 10th off Hadjar's pace in qualifying performance this season, and has scored plenty more points in recent rounds than he did at the start of the year. So all of a sudden, that battle at Racing Bulls is getting pretty interesting towards the end of the season. And clearly it's a pretty damn good car. Imagine Max in that car. What could be possible with that Racing Bulls? You gotta wonder. It seems relatively tame, so it seems more drivable for a non-totally exceptional driver than the Red Bull is, which is difficult to drive, and only Max can really, of the drivers that have tried, get the best out of that machine. The Racing Bull is certainly less volatile, but also probably doesn't have the same performance ceiling that the Red Bull has, but on certain weekends, enough to outperform one or even both of the Red Bulls, as we saw in Hungary. A couple of quick things on Ferrari. We saw this the other day, but some further rumours that Hamilton is keen to make some operational changes to the individuals involved behind the scenes. Will be comparing to see what Fred Vasseur does now his position at that team is more secure. There was also talk about the state of their car, some of the issues and the mistakes they made with the design of it, because there was this like big optimism that at, well, Hungary, but also Spa before that, when they finally brought their new rear suspension. Let's not forget, by the way, that rear suspension we thought was going to arrive in Silverstone a very long time ago. It didn't. It got delayed. They brought it for Spa. And has it helped? Yeah, but not enough is the reality. And as is suggested, they switched to that front pull rod at the start of the year. And this is a big decision, right? They've always been push rod at the front for a very, very long time, Ferrari. This year they decided to go to pull rods, and with the belief that it would help the car and make it more competitive. But as we know, that risk was too great, and they've made some mistakes from the outset that have effectively cooked their whole concept. The car now hits the plank in unforeseen zones due to an unpredicted vehicle dynamic response. Again, what they saw in the sim doesn't match what they see in reality, and as a result, their car is just not performing as they would like, and as a result, they're raising the tyre pressures to keep the plank from getting worn, and it's killing their performance. And weekend after weekend, they've got a car which seems almost there or thereabouts, but is never good enough when it really matters. And when you've got, at the start of the season, Ferrari saying an awful lot of, oh, well, you know, just wait until we unleash the potential of the SF25, the potential of that car exists purely in a hypothetical simulator-based world. And, well, the drivers know this, as does, I'm sure, Max Verstappen, who's considering his next venture as a team, potentially beyond Red Bull. Could it be to Ferrari? Will Max drive a Ferrari at some point? Possibly. But as we know, the big talk has been, understandably, about Aston to some degree, because Aston would certainly give Max whatever he wanted to go and drive for that team. And it makes some sense, the Honda deal, the Adrian Newey being on board. You could see why that would be tempting for Max. But Mercedes has been the most reasonable likely option, because the Oscar Lando partnership at McLaren is currently strong. It seems to be working out for all parties. I don't expect that to break up anytime soon, but you wouldn't totally rule it out. Let's say Lando wins the championship this year. Maybe Mark Webber feels like Piastri's getting the short end of the stick. I don't think it will happen, but I don't expect the Piastri-Norris lineup to last forever, because while McLaren are competitive, and as those drivers become increasingly competitive within their own team, they, you know, fireworks are bound to happen at some point between that driver pairing. It's just how it is in F1. McLaren can try what they like to stop that, but at some point there is going to be friction between those two. It may happen this year, it may happen in years to come. We certainly saw friction between these two guys in this picture on the screen at Mercedes. But there's a feeling that next year, assuming that McLaren keep their drivers together, and maybe that stays the same for some time, Mercedes is a compelling option because they've been embarrassed by McLaren over the last few years. They've embarrassed themselves by keep making changes to this car and doesn't seem to do anything or really resolve the issues. It may feel to Toto that he needs Max Verstappen to get that team back on track, and Mercedes might well feel the same way. They probably could get him if they want in the next couple of years, assuming Red Bull are not the best team in 2026. And as a result, there are concerns for the future of maybe Antonelli, but also for where George Russell might sit in all of this. Now, it was a big question over the last few weeks when there are rumours continuing to emerge. Why has Russell not got a contract? What's going to happen with Max? That's now clearer. Max says he's going to stay at Red Bull next year. That seems to be locked in, and Russell still doesn't have a contract, which is one of the big questions of this summer break period. Now, next year, Mercedes may kill it with the engine, but I just wanted to quickly discuss why that is less likely than it was in 2014. FIA are trying to stop that from happening. Interesting article was put out here by Autosport discussing why this is less likely than before. So first of all, they've tried to simplify these 2026 engines as much as possible. They're probably not going to do a great job of it because fundamentally they're extremely complicated, but they have eliminated the MGU-H. So in the current engines, there's an MGU-H, which recovers energy from heat, and there's an MGU-K, which recovers kinetic energy from under braking. So the MGU-H recovers energy from the turbo, and the MGU-K from the force under braking. Now, the MGU-H is a complicated piece of kit. It doesn't really have much utility in road cars, and it's actually a big performance differentiator between the teams. So in 2014, that was especially true. So they've elected for 2026 simply to eliminate the MGU-H. It's no longer going to be a thing. The engine will only recover energy for the battery through braking, through the MGU-K, which stays around, slightly different to before. But that's effectively why they believe that the performance differentials are likely to be smaller than they were in 2014, when Mercedes had an absolute rocket ship of an engine. Now, if Mercedes do have a rocket ship of an engine, or Ferrari have a rocket ship of an engine compared to anyone else who knows, there will be performance differentiators to effectively give concessions to the teams with weaker engines. So they've been defining over the last couple of months how this actually looks in reality, what the numbers look like. But as they say, there's a concept called ADUO, which is an acronym for Additional Development and Upgrade Opportunities. This concept has had lots of work. Essentially, every 5 or 6 races, there will be an average performance measured for each PU manufacturer. Those who are below a certain level, and depending on how much below they are, will get that benefit accumulating over the year. So they get more money to spend, more development money, some more dyno hours, and the possibility to make a new homologation of the engine. People who are behind will have the opportunity to speed up and catch up. So pretty interesting, right? If you are like Alpine say that they're like 30 horsepower down. That's what they say. The real number may be less than that, but the FIA will be testing it. Every few Grand Prix, the FIA will test the performance of the engines, and if one is too slow compared to the others, they will give that team more money to spend. They won't give them the money, but they will allow them to spend more money and to do more testing to try and get their engines up to speed. Is it going to make much difference in 26? Probably not, but is it going to make a big difference to teams like Audi in the due course? Probably it will, let's be honest, right? And maybe for Red Bull as well, this could potentially be massively beneficial. Is that going to affect the way that Max Verstappen looks at this situation? Toto's still saying, well, we got rid of the new rear suspension, the old one's back on the car, it's done a better job, the car's finally found some pace back, Russell got the podium, as we know, in Budapest. And therefore, the rumours have started to re-emerge about what's going to happen with world champion Max Verstappen. Now, this I thought was pretty funny because Red Bull came out and said, Toto, he was just stirring up these rumours to disrupt the team. And on some level, he probably was. Now, it was also, from Mercedes' perspective, with Toto stirring up the Max rumours, disrupting his own team, disrupting his own drivers, their confidence, their preparation to some degree. I don't know if it really affected them massively, but it was certainly relevant, and Russell and Antonelli have talked about it being not ideal, that Max was constantly in the conversation with Toto. But Red Bull are saying, well, there was nothing in that. It's just Toto stirring up rumours to destabilise our team and, I don't know, get Christian Horner out the door, whatever the case is. That's one of the implications. But was Toto really stirring up the rumours, or was there more to it than that? Because this was a comment from Max at the end of July. He was asked the question because there were rumours that his yacht and his plane and Toto's yacht were all in the same place in Sardinia just after Christian Horner got sacked. And people were thinking, Are they having a meeting? Are they discussing contract terms? Like, what's going on there, right? And neither of them denied it, right? Max said that, look, if my boat's next to Toto's, then it's next to Toto's. Just a coincidence, guys. You can have a personal relationship with someone without having a work relationship with someone, he says. So that's what he said at the end of July, which is pretty entertaining. And as of today, we now have some images. Now, I think these images are very recent, to my understanding. So these aren't from a few weeks ago when we were talking about the meeting together on a boat. These are from like today, and these have been doing the rounds. And well, I think you can pretty clearly tell who these guys are. This is obviously Max Verstappen, and that's very clearly Toto Wolff. And obviously people are talking about it, aren't they? Because like Max is in a towel on Toto's yacht, and it's just all very entertaining, I think. But you know, you can see that obviously the quality isn't great. You can see that Toto's got a bit of grin on his face. There's a bit of interpolation going on here with some of the pixels. You can tell that these aren't the quite original images, but yeah, it's Max and Toto on a yacht together. There's been a number of pictures doing the rounds. There might just be one more, there might not be. I think those are the pictures that are doing the rounds as of today of Toto and Max on the same yacht alongside one another. So, you know, what's going on here, right? Because Max can say what he likes about, oh, it's just a personal relationship. It's not a work relationship. There's nothing going on there. You know, we're simply good friends, right? But you know, if you're George Russell, you're seeing this unfold, you'll be like, damn, you know, they pretended that they weren't on the same yachts back in July, and now here we are at the start of August on the summer break, and they're on the same yacht together, you know, eating some caviar, sharing some champagne. And you gotta wonder where there's anything in that, right? Like, you think Toto and Max are just good friends? You think they're not talking a bit? You know, you think they're not gossiping about Christian Horner getting sacked? You think they're not gossiping about what a potential Mercedes team could look like in 2027? You know, for these guys, their work is their life. Of course they're gonna be talking a little bit about what's going on the track. That's how it is. So, this kind of came out of nowhere today, really. We felt like for the summer break, things might calm down a bit. But it has raised big questions on what's going to happen with George. So there were rumours at the end of July, similar time actually to when Max made those comments, because at the same time, that's when Max confirms he's staying at Red Bull. And Max has said this. He said that Red Bull is my destination. I'm staying there in 26. And I think it's sensible for Max to do this. He could jump ship now. It's not impossible. He would be allowed to. There might be a buyout in place that someone would have to pay. But if he said to Red Bull, like, I don't want to be here anymore, I'm going to leave for 26, then it would happen, right? That's the power that Max holds. And another team would, you know, probably Aston Martin maybe, or maybe Mercedes would pay the money for him. But he's decided that it makes more sense. It's less risky to stay, because if you leave and you go to a team that actually, you know, what if Mercedes next year just get crushed again by McLaren? Then, you know, then Max would have made a big mistake in joining Mercedes. So it makes sense to join Red Bull, stay at Red Bull, see how things go, make a decision in due course. That's what Max has said that he's going to do. But as we know, in 2026, the conversation is still going to be here around where Max is going to go, right? Like, it's not going away anytime soon. And especially with these images of today, it's definitely not going away. So there was a rumor that Russell's going to get a 2-year deal, and it's going to take him at least until the end of 2027, you know, multi-year contract, 2+1, something along those lines. Toto says that I'm happy with my drivers. Russell will be renewed soon. I had to talk to Max first. The question is, okay, why hasn't Russell got a contract already? We're here in the summer break. Russell is maybe the best driver of the season so far, definitely right up there. I actually might have him now as my best driver of the season. I think there's a few candidates. Verstappen obviously is up there. Piastri's in the ballpark. Leclerc's obviously in the mix as well. Norris, I think, one step behind those guys I've just mentioned. But you can very much argue that Russell has been the best performer of this season so far, but he's not got a contract with one of the biggest teams in the sport. Why is that? The only reasonable explanation is that Toto wants to be clear that whatever he gives Russell at least gives potential room for manoeuvre if Max is available. Because Toto's like, yeah, I'm glad I talked to Max, glad we had the discussion. And Toto was also pretty clear that he's not ruling out a Max Mercedes deal at some point in the future. So I think that Toto, especially with these images today, like, he must be thinking that when that deal with Russell is signed, if it's not like a straight up 2+1, there might have to be some sort of clause in there which gives the room for manoeuvre with both Antonelli and with Russell. If Max wants to join a Mercedes, nail it, that gives them the leeway to be able to do that, because Toto is not going to want to allow Max to, let's say, run free and go to another team. Like, let's say Max wants to leave Red Bull. Does Toto want to, effectively be in a position where he has to go to Aston and there's no other option? Toto would want to be in a position to give him a drive at that point, and he has to make sensible decisions to ensure that's going to be happening. So very much interested your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments. Just one final thing. This is just a mock-up, but we talked about Audi earlier. We talked about some of the 2026 cars. And as you can tell by the wheel covers here, this isn't the 2026 car regulation kind of spec. It's just a livery on the current setup, what it might look like. But would you like a livery like this on next year's car on the grid? I think it looks pretty tasty to me. So very much interested your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.